Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts for Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we're going to talk about questions that come up a lot in our conversations with teachers, EAs, principals, and superintendents. Namely, so how do we talk to parents about student absenteeism? What I like about this podcast conversation is that we suggest actually not talking about attendance the first time or even all the time. I think it's important to learn and understand more about student absenteeism because it can help you change your approach to those conversations with parents. Let's face it, all of us have parents that we deal with who are hard for us to talk with. And it's even harder for us to talk about their child's absenteeism. So this episode can help you build connections with parents, our key partners in education. Some of the main topics we'll be covering include simple contacts are best, but not about the problem like attendance right away, remember? Secondly, avoid feeling defensive in a conversation with parents by changing your intention to that of a curious listener. And parents know their child better than you do, so try to learn something from them. At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find free restorative resources. And if you enjoy this, be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Now, let's head over to the conversation with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. One of the things that comes up regularly in our meetings with teachers in our trainings is the question of how do I deal with parents and how do I talk to parents about attendance? We've had some really interesting conversations about this. So, what kinds of things have you heard and what kinds of things can we suggest from a restorative practice perspective about talking with parents?
The first thing I'd probably say is let's not talk to them first about attendance,
I love it.
right? So we talk a lot with our people that we train about building relationships, and parents know their children aren't at school. They know they're expected to be at school, and they probably had these conversations or these phone calls or these letters time and time again. So if you're trying to make a difference in your connection to parents, probably that's not the place you're going to start. And we spend a lot of time talking about how to build relationships with students, but also with parents.
It's very similar to what we let teachers know that the first time you hold a circle in your classroom shouldn't be when there's a problem. The first time as a teacher you talk to a parent shouldn't be about their attendance issues. So you need to build those, start from the ground up, those simple relationship building type of phone calls and contacts, however those contacts are. And these days it could be a phone call, it could be emails, it could be something posted on whatever the board's communication tool is, and every board has a tool that each classroom teacher can communicate. Essentially, it's electronic emailing. And sometimes those are the first contacts they make. And then ultimately it's a phone call, or you meet them coming in the morning, or you meet them at every school tries to in September have that meet the teacher night thing. And so hopefully you meet a good half or more of your parents on that night. And it's all should be about, as you say, not about attendance, not about academics. Let's just talk to each other and get to know each other. So then when the conversation does come to something a little more difficult, there's more of a comfort level there for the teacher in having that conversation with the parent. Because we have heard that, Stan, about how teachers don't feel as comfortable speaking to adults as they do speaking to other children.
I know it. And I thought it was very cool to hear when we asked the question, so why do you feel less comfortable talking to parents as opposed to students? And a number of teachers jumped in on that.
They did. I I asked them to reflect on what it was because it's the same for me. I would do all sorts of things with kids in front of kids, but put some adults in the room and it feels very different. And what we came to in that discussion was the fear of being judged in some way, that children don't judge us. They take what we have, they allow for our mistakes. If we look silly, it's okay. Or if we don't get it right, we don't have that same response or feeling about adults. We feel like we may be judged if we don't get it right.
And I would also suggest that, if a teacher is calling a parent and it is about attendance, or it's about struggling in a subject, or anything where it's almost a troubling situation, the parent's going to immediately start to feel almost a little defensive. That could be that shame affect. And depending on the parent, they may start to push back a bit. And Now the teacher's having to decide, okay, how far do I want to go with this conversation? I'm not comfortable with this either. And because parents do feel it, and as we're all parents, we've all had kids, you get that phone call from the school saying your child's not doing X, Y, or Z, or they're not at school or whatever. You immediately start to feel, what am I doing wrong? I didn't know that. I got to fix this. So you do start to feel a little, take some ownership on it as a parent. And we know a lot of our parents will push back on at that point or become defensive at that point. And teachers just don't want to have those courageous conversations, those conflict laden conversations. And they know it's probably going to come. So that's why they're hesitant to make that call in the first place.
If they've done that building time, then when we get to the point of having that conversation, we've got a bit of a rapport. Why I'm interested in some of the things in your world, or you get an understanding of me as a person a bit. So now we can have a conversation. It's going to be very different than that's your first point of contact or second contact.
I think too, it would help if we as teachers lightened up a little bit in terms of not taking the comments that are coming back to us personally. And part of what would be helpful there is to simply be a bit more reflective, take that attitude of curiosity. Brene Brown talks about those kinds of things and simply state, here's what I'm noticing. What are you noticing from your perspective? And what do you think about it? And how's that impacting you? And that your entry into the conversation. So first of all, the conversations you have at the beginning should not be about attendance. Secondly, if you're going to have the conversation about attendance, talk about your observations, but ask questions. Use the restorative questions until, and if you have to pull out the little card with the questions on it, but use those questions as a way of not judging somebody's parenting. Because the second a person feels like they're being judged about their parenting, it's very personal. It's
Right.
very
And,
personal.
and when you use the restorative questions and you're working your way through, get into that question, okay, what can we do about this? Saying we as opposed to what are you going to do about this? Or what can be done? And that opens the door to the parents say, well, I can do this, and the teachers, well, I can do that. It becomes a we situation, not what are you going to do as a parent to make sure your kids get into school on time. And so it's all about keeping those questions, as you say, those observation things out there. I'm observing this as opposed to here's my conclusion, your child's failing. That keeps the conversation a little bit lighter. It keeps it more, as you say, a conversation as opposed to an accusation. And I find that that's always been the best way. I've told teachers for years, make your observations, but don't draw conclusions. We're not doctors. Don't call a parent and say, by the way, I think your child has autism. Who are you? But here's what I've noticed about your child. I've noticed this, I've noticed this, I've noticed this. And let the parent go, oh my goodness, we better look into this and see what it is. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, those are all the earmarks for X, Y, or Z situation. But you're not going to say that because we're entitled to say that. When you start those conversations with parents, I've noticed lately that Johnny's marks are really struggling in whatever. What have you noticed? And what's been happening at home and what's been happening that may be causing this? And that opens up the door. And it may be related to attendance, but you're not talking about attendance. You're talking about their academics. And it may come around the parents say, well, geez, if they get to school more often, oh, okay, let's talk about that. So in a way you can get that again, that's looking at attendance as a symptom, not problem.
That stance of curiosity, we can't drive it home enough, really influences how you approach a situation, that you are not the expert in this child. That, guess what? The parent does have a lot of knowledge about their child. So always remaining curious, whether that's with a parent or a child or another staff member, that you've got something to learn. And that comes through in your delivery. If you truly believe you're coming from a place of curiosity, and there's some more information I need to understand about this child.
And the better the relationship you have with the parent, the better the conversations you'll have, and the more information you can actually share about areas of concern down the road, whether that's attendance or academics or anything else. So build those relationships with parents and take the same approach that you take with students to the adults that you both work with and the adults that you encounter as parents. As educators, we usually find it easier to talk with students than with parents. The adults can make us feel like we're being judged, and that can make us defensive, and that shuts down conversations and connection. It takes an intentional switch to being curious and to asking restorative questions to actually turn things around. Find out more about asking great questions from a stance of curiosity at www.restorative.ca. Email me, stan@restorative.ca, and let's ask some curious questions and then take the time to listen to the answers you hear.